So last week I reviewed Con Air and I thought, hey, why not review all three of Nicolas Cage's big action movies of the late 90s? And that brings us to The Rock. So let's talk about it. So The Rock is a 90s action movie directed by Michael Bay, and for good reason, a lot of people consider this his best film. If you haven't seen The Rock, essentially the plot is Ed Harris plays an army general who's disgruntled about the way the military and the government have treated certain veterans, and therefore he steals 16 nerve gas missiles and takes hostages on Alcatraz, The Rock, and threatens to shoot these nerve gas missiles at San Francisco if certain reparations are not paid to the widows of these families. Well, the government doesn't want to pay this money and they don't want him to take hostages, and therefore they concoct a plan to take in a bomb expert played by Nicolas Cage, and using the one guy who ever escaped from Alcatraz, Sean Connery, a British spy who's been in captivity for 30 years for trying to steal being a British spy guy. Then they send them into Alcatraz to try and stop Ed Harris. And that's the setup for our movie. And it's quite enjoyable. And they find all the right ways to pull all the right emotions out of this premise that's pretty ludicrous. It's a very 90s action movie type premise. And it's a lot of fun. But before I go into my full review, I want to give a big shout out to Almost Sideways. He's a fellow YouTuber as well as my supporters on Patreon. If you don't know what that is, it's a way that you can support my channel directly financially so that I can continue doing what I'm doing and bring you even better content. And each month I ask my patron supporters, is there anything that they want me to review? Last week I reviewed Scream 2 because Cody Leach asked me to review it. And this week Almost Sideways asked me to review The Rock, and therefore this is my review of that movie. If you're interested in supporting my channel, the link is down below where you can do that, and you can make suggestions, and I'll review movies for you each month and have extra input into how I do things, as well as I did a collaboration recently with Almost Sideways over on his channel. We talked about our top 5 Pixar movies. On my channel, I ranked them, but I just talked about them real quick. Over there, we had a full, long discussion about our 5 favorite Pixar movies. Please go check out his channel, like, subscribe, share, all that fun stuff over there. Tell him that I sent you over there. Help his channel be as successful as is possible. With all that said, let's get back to talking about The Rock. And let's start off talking about the good. Right off the bat, this is a movie that's very nicely conceived. The elements to it fit together really nicely. So it's kind of a basic 90s action sort of setup of guys take over US Monument thing, guys have to go in to stop them. That's pretty standard, but they worked in elements to it that each element kind of is fascinating. So you've got Ed Harris, who's not really a villain. He thinks he's the person doing the right thing. He's doing something villainous, trying to make something that was wrong right. And so it makes him a really interesting, captivating villain that makes him pop in the scheme of action movies. And kind of within that, even what he's doing, he doesn't kill a bunch of people. Whenever people do die, he's more broken up about it than anyone else in the whole movie because he's not a villain. That makes him a great villain because the actual tension of his motives that make him interesting and fascinating. Then you move along from there and you've got Sean Connery as the former British guy, so you got that's been in prison for 30 years, so you get a little fish out of water comedy with that. You have spy guy stuff, you have them breaking in type stuff. There's a whole bunch of elements to that just make it really interesting. Then you have the guy that's out of place in this whole mix with bomb guy Nicolas Cage, and you get a really weird over-the-top Nicolas Cage performance here that feels like it shouldn't work, but Michael Bay finds a way to pull all of these weird angles together to create something that does work. Like for me, I like Hawaiian pizza. On paper, it doesn't make any sense to me that if you throw pineapple on a pizza, that it would taste good, but I still like it. And that's kind of what it is here. If you just look at some of these ways that Nicolas Cage delivers these lines, it shouldn't work. Even some of the little lines within the movie, they shouldn't work. But the way the world is built, the way all the pieces come together, something that on paper seems stupid somehow works. Likewise, one of the things that I think kind of covers all this and makes it work really nicely is there's actually quite a bit of world building. It's subtle world building, but it's world building nonetheless, in that the story behind Sean Connery's character is that he's this spy that learned the US secrets and therefore they locked him up for all this time. And they make just these little statements about he knows what really happened at Roswell. He knows what really happened at with JFK. And these little lines that, if you add them all up, it's 20 seconds of screen time, but it makes the world that they're in more interesting, where they imply aliens exist, where they imply that there are big government conspiracy about JFK, and they say little lines that makes everything just have a nicer feel to it. It makes the backstory between Sean Connery and these government guys so much more interesting in some small little lines. Like, my wife's favorite scene in the whole movie is the very last scene in the movie that's kind of this little epilogue that makes a little reference back to the JFK thing. That's her favorite scene in the movie, and that's all the world building that's done with such small lines that work in crafting this fun universe that looks a lot like our universe, or looks a lot like most Michael Bay action movie universes, that just has nice touches to it. Also, this is kind of Michael Bay's strong spot. He loves government type stuff. He loves military. He loves big action and explosions, and this setup gives him a playground to play in, where even our villain gets to be a hero because he's an army guy battling for soldiers. Michael Bay's very patriotic from his films. Very clearly, that's a sort of person he is, and he's very much pro our military. And you get that sense in this movie, not pro war, but pro people that serve the country. And so that plays into this, that you get these nice dynamics to it. And this almost makes this movie a very frustrating movie to exist, because of how bad what Michael Bay has done over the last 15 years has been, and how it's so devoid of what you see in this movie. And there's scenes in this movie that are just like heart-wrenching, where Michael Biehn and his group of guys are trying to break into Alcatraz, and I don't want to say what happens in the movie, but it's crafted so well and dramatic in such a way and directed so well that you really feel what's happening in the movie, and the scenario that plays out makes sense to where no one's really in the wrong. You understand why everyone's doing what they're doing, but bad things happen when you play these sorts of games. And so just a lot of really well-crafted sequences, a lot of the right environments for Michael Bay to shine, and just, of course, just going through the cast of this movie is kind of a final positive on it. It's so wonderfully cast. So Ed Harris, of course, being a great actor. I mean, he's not funny at all. He's not really all that charismatic in this role, but he's not supposed to be. He's supposed to be this guy that absolutely believes in what he's doing. He knows how extreme it is, and he believes he has to do some dramatic gesture to try and right the wrongs of the past. And he plays that perfectly. And at the same time, you've got Sean Connery in this kind of fun, anti-hero, angry spy who's not a bad guy, but he's just angry at the people that he's having to serve in this movie. That makes him really fun and interesting. And if you're going to get a aged British spy in the year 1996, Sean Connery is, of course, the perfect person to cast for that role, and he does it perfectly. For what the movie gives him to do, I'll have a couple complaints about him in just a little bit, but he, as an actor, as a performer, as the personality, as the performance, this is what you want, and he does it just right. And then, like I said, somehow Nicolas Cage's weird, over-the-top performance works. But then you go throughout the movie, and there's all these, throughout the whole movie, almost everyone in this is someone that they're one of those, it's that guy sorts of people. So Tuco from Breaking Bad is in this movie, and in the 90s, he was in almost every movie that had military guys in Clear and Present Danger, Under Siege, The Substitute, this one, as military henchman guy number 3. And that's kind of what he is in this movie as well. And you just go through the whole movie, and it's all those types of people that you recognize from other things. They're not necessarily A-listers, but they're people that you recognize from things. Final last thing to talk about the positives. There's so many quotable lines in this movie throughout the whole thing, and they take lines that should be stupid and silly, and they make them work, and they make them interesting. And even when there's a stupid line, like, I'm gonna take joy in gutting you, boy, Cuts to the next scene, and it's Nicolas Cage making fun of how ridiculous that line is, which makes the line amazing. And after the movie was over, the people I watched it with, I had a bunch of buddies that had never seen it before. We were joking about the lines in the movie and kind of how nicely they they're just quotable, they're funny, they're memorable. And they're the sorts of ingredients that, like I said at the beginning, all these things together, the world building, the 90s action movie scenario, Michael Bay's seriousness while weird sense of humor, all of them kind of come together in this movie for kind of the perfect Michael Bay type movie. So that's all the positives, which are a bunch of glowing positives. There's a few issues I had with it, especially rewatching it last night, kind of picking up on a couple things. And really, there's kind of two things that kind of came to mind. We'll go with three things. Two of them are kind of connected. The first one is the movie has, once you get to kind of the second half of the movie, and once you get to the point that it's Nicolas Cage and Sean Connery, just the two of them on the island, suddenly there's some pretty big plot holes. There's some gaps in the logic in what they do in the film that's noticeable. You get up to a certain point, and the terrorist military guys, their actions make a lot of sense. They're smart. They're out thinking everyone. And you reach a point in the movie where the only reason that Sean Connery and Nicolas Cage are successful is because the bad guys become stupid, and things are left unguarded. People are left unguarded, and so things are able to happen that make our heroes victorious that wouldn't happen if our bad guys that were so smart the first half of the movie were a quarter as smart as they were in the first half of the movie, in the second half of the movie. And therefore, it pulls you out of the movie when you're watching it being like, why isn't anyone watching this? Why isn't anyone watching them? Why are all those censor things? Where did those go? Why are they able to get away with doing all this stuff? It really pulls you out of the movie in the second half of the movie. And then the two second problems, one of them is with Sean Connery as the actor. Great, perfect guy to cast in the movie, so it's hard to make this complaint. But physically, when it comes to aging action stars over the last 15 years, we've had the Sylvester Stallone has kind of spearheaded the old guy action movie along with Liam Neeson. We've got these guys in their 60s that are showing up all the guys in their 30s. Sean Connery's character is that in this movie, but Sean Connery is not that. And so his actual action sequences he's not as impressive as Stallone has been in stuff, and Liam Neeson has been in stuff where you actually see these old guys moving their arms around, beating guys up, and you actually believe it. Of course, with Stallone being on whatever horse steroids he's on that make him look the way that he still looks now that he's 70 years old. You don't get that with Sean Connery here. And there's like a scene where he punches Nicolas Cage, and it's literally like this little awkward punch thing to Nicolas Cage's stomach. And you just see it and you go, okay, you can clearly see that he's, compared to average 65-year-old man that you would see on the street, yeah, he's doing good. When it comes to guy that you believe is taking out 12 special forces guys with his hands and fighting them off, you don't buy it. He doesn't sell the action enough. And I don't want to harp on the point too much because the acting side to it, he's very good at. The physical acting of what his character's supposed to pull off, you don't buy it. And some of that's, like I said, the last 15 years have spoiled us on some of these action hero guys that really are still kicking ass into their 70s. Sean Connery's character did. He was not on that part. And somewhat to that same criticism of the action in it, I prefer more choreographed, like cool looking shots and cool types of action in it. And Michael Bay does more visceral and the nature of it and the way it's kind of staged. And so there's not like a cool fight scene in the movie. There's not like a shootout in it that pops to me in a way that was like, oh, there was this really cool type stuff. Some other Michael Bay movies have had some stuff like that where he's done these spinning around shots, like in Bad Boys 2, there's just one really cool spinning around action sequence. And there's just some of that's not here. Minor complaint for a movie that has great action. Very enjoyable movie. Had a good time with it. The people I watched it with, they weren't like raving about the movie afterwards, but one of them said, it's not one of my favorite movies of all time, but it might be my favorite movie of 1996, which is a very specific praise of a movie that might possibly be true. Now, for me, like I said, I think I watched all three of the Nicolas Cage action movies, The Rock, Con Air, and Face Off in the theaters when they came out. And at the time, The Rock was the one that I was least interested in and kind of caught me I remembered the least. Whereas Con Air and Face Off, those are like definitive high school action movies for me. Reflecting back as a older gentleman that's been watching these movies, what older gentleman? Why did I say it like that? Watching these for 20 years, The Rock seems to have aged the best. I love all three of these movies. I would give all these movies very positive reviews, and I think they're great examples of 90s action movies and great example of why Nicolas Cage is a big action star, not just a weird meme guy that does weird stuff. With all that said, if I'm going to give a rating for this one, I think I'm going to go with an 8.5 out of 10. If the consistency and some of the writing held through, I would have gone probably 9 or higher, but because there's some big plot holes that did kind of pull me out in the second half, there's also a little bit of pacing unevenness in the film where it feels like it kind of rushes through some of the stuff once they get to The Rock to be able to get through everything with the time jumps and stuff. But all in all, this is a very enjoyable movie with very minor types complaints about issues with it. And if I'm being honest, if you're an action movie lover, of course you should go check this out. It's a great time. You will love it. This is great 90s action movie that I want you to go check out. But how about you? What did you think about it? Tell me down below in the comment section. I would love to hear your thoughts on it. Get some lively discussion about Michael Bay and what happened to him? Why did he do all these crappy Transformers movies? Let's talk about it down below. With all that said, be sure to head over to Almost Sideways' channel, watch our collab talking about our top 5 Pixar movies, subscribe to his channel. He's a great guy. I've enjoyed getting to know him over the last couple of months. Fun to talk about movies with. Also, if you're new to my channel, please consider clicking that subscribe button. I do movie reviews, retro reviews like this one you're watching right now, some TV reviews. Every Saturday, I drop a new ranking video. This Saturday, it's going to be all of the Transformers movies, all 6 Transformers movies, the 5 Michael Bay monstrosities, as well as the 80s cartoon. I did rewatch it just to do this video, and I'm rewatching through the series as well to be able to do this ranking video. Check that out on Saturday. It is coming. And with all that said, thank you for watching.